He gave away 40 acres of the best bottomland in the valley to a woman he had met exactly once, and the whole town of Cedar Hollow decided he had finally lost his mind. They were not entirely wrong to wonder. Selah Crane had not given anything away in 11 years. Not his time, not his trust, not so much as a kind word he could keep for himself. Yet there he stood in the land office on a gray March morning, signing his name to a deed that handed the river meadow to Miss Adeline Fairmont, a schoolteacher who owned 2 trunks, a Bible, and no idea what she had walked into. She did not thank him. She looked at the paper, then looked at him and said, "I won't be bought." "I'm not buying," he said. "I'm getting rid of it." That was a lie, and somewhere underneath his weathered silence he knew it, but neither of them understood the truth yet. Selah Crane was 36 and looked older. The frontier did that to a man who worked alone. He was tall and broad through the shoulders, with hands that had been broken and healed crooked, and a face that had forgotten how to soften. His dark hair had gone gray at the temples early. People said his eyes were cold. They were not cold. They were guarded, which is a different and lonelier thing. He ran the largest cattle spread in the valley, the Crane Place, 4,000 acres he had built up from a single failing claim. He was respected. He was feared a little. He was not loved, and he had arranged it that way on purpose. 11 years before, he had married a girl named Mary. He had built her a house with his own hands and promised her a life. The winter of the 2nd year took her, and the child she carried, both in the same terrible week, while the snow piled so high against the door that the doctor could not reach them in time. Selah had dug 2 graves in frozen ground with a pick because he could not bear to wait for the thaw. After that he stopped letting people close. Grief, he had decided, was the price of caring, and he had paid all he was willing to pay. He filled the empty years with work. He bought land the way other men drank. He told himself the cattle were enough. He almost believed it. His hidden fear was simple and enormous. He was afraid that if he ever let himself want something again, the world would take it the way it had taken the rest. So he wanted nothing, and he was the loneliest man in 3 counties. Adeline Fairmont was 28, and had crossed half a continent to teach school in a town she had never seen. She was not beautiful in the way the catalog sold. She was tall and plain handsome, with a strong jaw and copper hair she pinned up severely, and a pair of clear gray eyes that missed nothing. She wore mended dresses without apology. She walked into rooms like she had every right to be there, which unsettled men who were used to women who waited to be noticed. Back east she had been engaged once, to a banker's son who admired her cleverness right up until the day he decided a wife should be ornamental rather than intelligent. He married someone quieter. Adeline packed her trunks the next month and answered an advertisement for a teacher on the frontier, where, she reasoned, a woman would be judged by what she could do rather than how she pleased. Her strength was her spine. She had taught herself Latin from a borrowed book, nursed her dying mother for 2 years, and buried her father before that. She was not afraid of hard work, hard winters, or hard men. What she feared, deep down where she let no one look, was that she would always be useful to people and never beloved by them. That she would spend her whole life being needed and never once being chosen. So when Selah Crane handed her 40 acres and called it garbage he was throwing out, she did not feel grateful. She felt insulted. She thought he was a rich, arrogant man playing some game with the new schoolteacher, the kind of man who solved every problem by throwing money or land at it because he had never learned to use words. She was wrong about him. He was wrong about her too. He looked at her plain dress and proud chin and decided she was a brittle Eastern woman who would last 1 season before she ran home crying. He had seen her kind quit before. The land had a history neither of them spoke of. The river meadow had been meant for the school. The town had promised a building for years and never delivered, and the children of Cedar Hollow were learning their letters in the back of the feed store. Selah had overheard 2 ranchers laughing about the schoolteacher's hopeless little crusade. He had ridden home, sat alone at his table, and remembered, against his will, a girl named Mary who had wanted nothing so much as children of her own to teach. By morning the deed was drawn. He told himself it meant nothing. He gave away the land so the laughter would stop bothering him. That was all. Their first real clash came 2 weeks later, and the whole town watched. Adeline had organized a work party to clear the meadow and raise the schoolhouse. She had no money, so she had charm and stubbornness instead, and she had talked a dozen families into lending their husbands for a Saturday. Selah's road passed on his way to market and saw her standing on a wagon bed, hammer in hand, giving orders like a general. He stopped. He could not help himself. "You're building it wrong," he said. The hammering stopped. Every head turned. "I beg your pardon," Adeline said. "Foundation's too close to the water. Spring flood comes through, you'll lose the whole thing in a season." He said it flat, the way he said everything, without softening the edge. Adeline climbed down from the wagon. She walked up to his horse and looked up at him with those gray eyes that did not flinch. "You gave me this land," she said, "and now you've come to tell me I'm too foolish to use it. Did you ride all this way for that, Mr. Crane, or was it simply on your route?" A few of the men chuckled and tried to hide it. Selah's felt his jaw tighten. "I'm telling you so you don't waste these people's labor." "Then tell me where to build," she said, "or ride on. I've no use for a man who points at problems and offers no solution." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he got down off his horse. He spent the next 4 hours showing them where the bedrock ran and how to set a foundation that would stand. He never smiled. He never said a gentle word. But he stayed until the sun went down, and when he finally rode away, Adeline stood in the half-dark looking after him, more confused than she wanted to admit. That was the beginning, though neither of them would have called it that. He came back the next Saturday. He said it was to make sure the foundation held. The Saturday after that he brought a wagon of milled lumber and said he'd had it sitting in his barn with no use for it. Which everyone knew was a lie, because nobody in that valley had spare lumber sitting around. Adeline noticed things about him slowly, the way you notice the shape of a hill emerging from morning fog. She noticed that he knew every man on the work crew by name and knew which ones were behind on their debts, and that twice she saw him quietly press a folded bill into a struggling hand and walk off before it could be acknowledged. She noticed that the children, who feared most grown men, were not afraid of him. The smallest Prout boy, a half-wild thing of 6, took to following Selah's around like a duckling, and Selah's, who never smiled, let him. She noticed that when she mentioned kneading books, a crate of them appeared on the schoolhouse step 3 days later, with no note. Primers and readers and a worn copy of Latin grammar. She knew exactly where they had come from, and she understood, holding that old grammar book, that this hard and silent man had paid attention to a thing she had said in passing. And Selah's, who had decided she would quit by autumn, watched her instead refuse to quit at anything. He watched her teach. He watched her sit up 3 nights with the Hendricks girl who had the fever, because the mother had 4 other children and no help. He watched her face down a drunk who staggered into the schoolyard, putting herself between the man and the children without a flicker of fear, talking him down so quietly that the man wept and left ashamed. He watched her plain, mended dresses and proud chin, and slowly understood that he had mistaken endurance for fragility, the way frightened men often do. One evening in early summer, he found her sitting alone on the schoolhouse steps after everyone had gone, her shoulders bent in a way he had never seen. "Trouble?" he asked. She did not turn. "The county won't fund a teacher's salary past the year. I've written 4 letters. They say a town this small doesn't warrant it." She laughed, a tired sound. "I gave up a great deal to come here, Mr. Crane. I find I gave it up for a position that may not exist by Christmas." He stood there in the long gold light, and something in him that had been frozen for 11 years cracked very quietly. "Why'd you come?" he asked. "A woman like you could have stayed east, married, had an easier life." She was quiet a long moment. Because back there I was only ever useful, she said. I want to matter to someone, not because of what I can do for them, just, she stopped, embarrassed. It's foolish. It isn't, he said. And then because she had been honest, he was honest too. He told her about Mary. He told her about the snow and the two graves and the pick against frozen ground. He had never told anyone. The words came out rough and broken, like water through a dam that had held too long. When he finished, Adeline did not pity him. She did the one thing no one had done in 11 years. She reached over and took his crooked hand in both of hers and held it and said nothing at all. That was the night the truth got loose. He had not given her the land to stop the laughter. He had given it because, for the first time since the snow, he had seen someone worth building something for. And she understood, sitting in the dark with his broken hand in hers, that the man the town called cold had simply loved one time, all the way down, and never recovered. They did not speak of it again for weeks, but everything had changed. He started coming by not on Saturdays only but on weekday evenings, with a fence post to set or a stove to mend, excuses both of them saw through and neither named. She started saving him a chair and a plate. The Prout boy began calling them, in his loud and tactless way, the schoolteacher and her man, and Selah's, who would once have corrected anyone sharply, only looked at his coffee and let the corner of his mouth move in something that on another face would have been a smile. The town noticed. The town approved. Folks who had feared Selah Crane for a decade watched him laugh once briefly at something Adeline said and treated it like a miracle, which in a way it was. Then the crisis came, the way it always does on the frontier, without warning and without mercy. It was August, the dry month, when the grass turned to tinder and the wind carried the smell of dust. A lightning storm came through one night with thunder and no rain, and by morning the whole western ridge was burning. The fire moved faster than any man could ride. It took the Olson place first, then jumped the creek and ran toward town. Every able body turned out with shovels and wet sacks and barrels of water, beating at the flames in a line that kept breaking. And the wind, the merciless wind, turned at midday and sent the fire straight down the river meadow toward the new schoolhouse, where Adeline had gathered the children, believing the water at her back would protect them. It would not. The fire was coming too fast, and the bridge that was their only crossing was already smoking. Selah's was 3 miles away on the fire line when a rider brought the word. He did not hesitate for the space of a single breath. He took the fastest horse and rode straight into the smoke, against the shouts of every man who told him the meadow was already lost. He found Adeline and 11 children trapped against the river, the fire eating toward them through the dry grass, the bridge half gone. There was no time to lead them across. There was no time for anything sensible. So he did the thing that was not sensible. He drove the children into the river itself, into the shallows, and he tore down what he could of the smoking bridge and threw the green willow brush and wet planks into a barrier. And then he did what only a man who had given up fearing death could do. He set a backfire. He burned a black scar in the grass between the children and the wall of flame, burned away the fuel so the big fire would reach them and find nothing left to eat. It worked, barely. The fire roared up to the black ground and faltered and split and went around them, and the children stood waist-deep in the cool river and watched it pass, terrified and saved. But Selah's had stayed in the smoke too long. When the worst of it had gone by, Adeline found him on his knees in the ash, his hands burned, his lungs full of smoke, barely able to stand. He had shielded the smallest Prout boy with his own body when a burning branch came down. She got him across the river. She would not let go of him. He was 3 days in a fever, and the doctor was honest that it could go either way. Adeline did not leave his bedside. She who had nursed a dying mother and a fevered child sat now beside this hard, broken, generous man, and she finally let herself weep, because she understood at last that she had been chosen, fully and without condition, by a man who had ridden into fire for her children without a moment's pause. On the 3rd night his fever broke. He opened his eyes and found her there, exactly as he had hoped and feared he would not. "You stayed," he said, his voice a ruin. "Where else would I be?" she said. He looked at her a long time. "I told you I gave you that land to be rid of it." "I know. I lied." "I know that too," she said, and smiled through her tears. The schoolhouse stood. The backfire and the river had saved it, the only building on the western edge the flames had spared. People said afterward that it was the schoolteacher's land that broke the fire's run toward town, that the green meadow and the river had been the line that held. The land Selah Crane gave away in spite became the thing that saved them all. They were married that autumn, under the cottonwoods by the river, with the whole valley there to watch. Adeline wore a mended dress, because it was hers and she was not ashamed of it, and Selah stood beside her with his bandaged hands and a look on his face that the town had never seen, the look of a man who had stopped being afraid to want. The county, shamed by a fire and shamed louder by a town that had defended its teacher, found the salary after all. Adeline taught in that schoolhouse for 30 years. The Prout boy grew up and became a teacher himself, and named his first daughter Adeline. Selah Crane, who had once arranged to be loved by no one, spent the rest of his life surrounded by children who were not his by blood and loved him anyway, and by one woman who had chosen him on purpose. He had given away 40 acres to a woman he had met exactly once, and the whole town decided he had lost his mind. But he had not lost it. He had finally found it again, the part of himself that the snow had buried 11 years before. He gave away the land believing it meant nothing. She took it and made it mean everything. He donated the land. She gave it a meaning. And in giving each other those two things, the gift and the meaning, two of the loneliest people in the valley discovered that the world does not only take. Sometimes, if you are brave enough to build again, it gives something back.